Civics is more important than democratics. Now, very interesting thesis, and if we have to take it seriously, if Lena says so. We have dabbled in issues like global civics. We, with the other schools in the network, organized a civic roundtable for the graduates of schools of political studies. These are all good reasons. Another reason, throughout this talk, I'll be referring to, social science research that I find enlightening and take seriously, and hopefully can inform us. One gentleman by the name of Joseph Henrich describes the secret of our success as humanity through cumulative nature of our knowledge. That is, each generation is born into a deeper pool of human knowledge than the previous one. Okay? No generation or no individual is very smart, but because we can rely on the knowledge of previous generation, we achieve higher and higher levels of prosperity and maybe civics. What does he mean? Take something like the idea of the alphabet. The fact that with 25 or 30 symbols, you can capture all human knowledge in writing. An extraordinary innovation, something that we learned from each other, something that none of us could have come up alone, but if you are born in the 21st century, that's a given knowledge that you are born into. Or take something like arithmetics, that with 10 numbers, you can do extraordinary calculations. Okay? These are all human innovations that caused extraordinary leaps when they were done, but none of us needed to do on our own because we were born into this pool of knowledge. Now, Joseph Heinrich challenges us to think about the smartest person we know. For the sake of argument, let's call him Einstein. And he says, if we had a time machine, and if we could take baby Einstein back 100,000 years, could he have achieved the marvelous things that he achieved? Probably no. If in the same time machine we could have taken a baby from the Stone Age into 2018, would he or she have anything lacking in adapting to our culture? No. So his thesis is that there is nothing particularly unique about the genius. The genius is in the system, is in the culture. Okay? So let's chalk this up as one thesis. Now, another gentleman by the name of Yuval Harari, who wrote the Sapiens book, some of you may have read it, it's a bestseller in a number of countries around the world. He argues that we owe our prosperity and our place in the food chain not to the competition we are capable of, but to the cooperation we are capable of. Okay? That too is an interesting thesis. His thought experiment is that, imagine one individual, one human being, and one monkey being taken to a remote island. And let's imagine we visit them in 2 months later. If we do, he argues, we would find the human being miserable, alone, and monkey joyous. Okay? Now he says, take 1,000 human beings and 1,000 monkeys to the same island and come back 2 months later. Humans have organized, probably put the monkeys in cage, and are running a capable system. So his argument is that we are where we are in the world, not because we jump the highest, or we run the fastest, or we hit the strongest, but it is because we cooperate the best. Meaning we cooperate in largest number, in highest numbers possible, and in the most flexible manner possible. So if you add Heinrich arguing that we owe our place in the world to the fact that we accumulate knowledge, to Harari, who says we have fine-tuned cooperation, I would say we have yet another reason to take civics seriously. I have a third reason that I want to share with you, and that relates to this experiment called the ultimatum game. So if you've heard of this and have participated in this before, you can choose to be quiet for the next 5 minutes, but for those of you who have not heard about this, This is an experiment where you're walking down the road, someone stops you, and then someone else the same surveyor stops someone else. So there are three of you in a huddle. The surveyor pulls out 100 euros and gives 100 euros to you, okay? And then asks you to split this money with the other person, whom you don't know, in any way you want that you decide. Hence the name, ultimatum, okay? The other person only has two choices. He or she can say yes to the split that you decided, in which case both of you get the money that you decided and go home. Or he or she can say no, in which case neither of you get anything. Okay? Is this more or less clear how this works? Does anyone have any questions about how this would work? There is no negotiation, no arguing. You're just given 100 euros, you decide how to split it with someone you don't know, where the other person only has two options. He or she can say yes, where you get the money you decided, or he or she can say no, where you get nothing, okay? So let's think about what you can do. Look at this. Now, if you believe, even if you believe in Homo economicus, this doesn't work. Why? Because the second person can say no. And if he or she says no, you don't get the 100 euros. But this is what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to maximize your gain, get 99 euros. The second person has to be foolish to say no to 1 euro, because that's 1 euro that he or she didn't have 3 minutes ago. So you maximize your gain, and you get away with maximizing your gain. So this is supposed to be what you're doing if you believe in Hobbes, Adam Smith, Charles Darwin, and Homo economicus. Yet only 6 people did this. Okay? A lot of you chose 50-50. What do you think is going on? To throw more data into the pot? This experiment has been done around the world for 30 years in all the countries imaginable. This is exactly what happens everywhere else. So you're not that unique. Okay? Don't think of yourself as special. People say no to this. They also say no to this. Interesting. People in the second position, when they're given 25 euros, they turn it down because they think this is unfair. Humanity is capable of taking on personal pain, paying a personal price to defend fairness. Interesting. Now, they don't say no to this. This works. The average is around the world, 55 for you, 25 for the second person. A lot of people do 50-50. Now, interestingly, this doesn't work either. None of these work. People in the second position oppose overly generous offers. They don't want to be indebted to this person. There is nothing in the rule saying, if I give you more money, you owe me something. But there is something in our cultures that recognizes implicit obligation, okay? So I would argue this is yet another reason why we need to take civics seriously. It seems like humanity understands fairness, that fairness is also an evolutionary tactics. E.Q. Wilson, so stuff about evolution didn't stop after Darwin. E.Q. Wilson, this biologist at Harvard, argues that yes, selfish individuals have an evolutionary advantage, but so do solidaric groups. Of course, the best place to be is to be a selfish individual in a solidaric group. We'll get to talk about this as well. But if a group of pro-social individuals stick together, they get certain gains. And this is why, despite all the propaganda about Homo economicus, people around the world understand intuitively why fairness is important to get cooperation. and why they are willing to pay a personal price to defend, to oppose unfairness, okay? You may be saying, okay, well, this is nice, but what if all these people are giving 50 because they are fearful of the second person saying no? There's another version of this experiment called the dictator's game, where all the same rules apply. You are given 100 euros, but in this case, the second person cannot decide, cannot say yes or no. They have to accept what you have given, okay? And in that case, the average split goes, does anyone want to guess what happens if you are given 100 euros and you decide for both of you how much money should go where? Okay, so our friends here are saying that if this was under the dictator's game parameters, everyone would keep all the money or just give 1 euros. You're wrong. The average is 70 to 30. Okay, so it's no longer 55 to 45. The average is 70-30, and also 1 out of 4 give 50 euros or more to the second person. Very interesting. There's absolutely no reason why they should do this, apart from maybe their conscience. Okay? So this gives us, these are my reasons for taking civics seriously. If I've intrigued you, and if we do take civics seriously, what do we see? What do we do? Let's start with something simple. Let's start with the way we greet each other. How do we greet each other? What do we do when we meet someone? We're in Greece. How did the Greeks greet each other 2,000 years ago? Shook hands. They were the first people shaking hands. We now shake hands, everyone shakes hands. This was a Greek innovation. The idea was to show that I had no knives in my hand, that I was coming in peace. Okay? The traditional way of greeting each other in Turkey is this term, and in most Muslim countries, is this term, alaikum salam, shalom, and that means I come in peace. In Judaism, it's exactly the same term, shalom aleichem. Pax vobis for Christianity, same logic, I come in peace. In South Asia, this namaste business. What does that mean? It means I recognize and respect the divinity in you, immediately reciprocated, so that we confer to each other that there is something special in each other. The most lyrical, beautiful version of greeting, I would say, is in South Africa, where they say "sawubona," meaning I see you. Of course, I see you if I'm greeting you, goes without saying, but no, the term means I see you as someone, as bearer of dignity and rights. I recognize you. You have a standing in me. Ironically, this grammar of greeting was also reflected or recognized by Kant, the quintessential philosopher of enlightenment, who talked about a right to hospitality. Now, interesting. We know about right to life, right to free speech, but what is the right to hospitality? And apparently, if you dig a little, what he's talking about is a right to goodwill. Okay? He is saying that you cannot treat me badly just because you don't know me. You have to start with the assumption of good faith. Now, if I prove you wrong, you can take this back. But initially, we have to extend each other recognition of good faith. So, why is that, do you think? Why do we greet each other the same way in very different parts of the world? Why is something as touchy-feely as goodwill is part of our, I would argue, civic grammar? Fortunately, for this too, there is social science research. There is a gentleman by the name of Robert Axelrod who wrote a very interesting book called Evolution of Cooperation, where he asked a simple question. Do egoists cooperate even when there is no central authority? Okay? He assumes that we are all self-seeking, but he sees cooperation. So why is there cooperation even when there is no one beating us on the head with a stick? Okay? To understand this, he runs a tournament, a computer programming tournament, around the prisoner's dilemma. Those of you who are boring economists and interested in game theory would know what this is. Prisoner's dilemma is a case where two people are arrested by the police when they are doing something nasty, maybe stealing a car. If neither of them talk, they go free, okay? They know this, because the police doesn't have enough evidence. If both of them talk, let's say they go to prison for 24 months, but if only one talks and implicates the other one gets 60 months, five years, okay? So, game theorists have done these experiments. If this is played once, and if you don't trust the other one, what do? You talk. Because if you don't talk, you can get 60 months. If you can't count on the other guy, and if both of them talk, they get 24 months. So they could have gone free if cooperation would have been the rational choice, but if they can't trust each other, they all end up in a place where they would rather not be. So this is a dilemma one needs to solve. He says this is going to be played in multiple rounds. So maybe we'll play 10 rounds, maybe 100 rounds. You never know which one is the last round, okay? And when this tournament is open to everyone around the world, people submit their programming and their strategy. When the tournament was carried out the first time, the strategy that wins is start with cooperation, so don't be the first one to talk, and then reciprocate when the other guy is doing. Okay, so if he cheats, you cheat back. If he cooperates, you cooperate back. It's called a nice strategy. You are never the first one to cheat. This strategy wins. Great. Robert Axelrod organizes a second tournament in 1 year. So everyone knows that this tit-for-tat tactic, never be the first one to cheat and reciprocate what the other one is doing, won. So you would expect that all the smart people would come up with a better strategy. No. The second tournament as well, the nice strategy, tit-for-tat, start with cooperation, start with goodwill, and reciprocate both cooperation and defection, wins the tournament. And come to think of it, this is also how life works. That when enough people that are cooperating with each other stick to each other, let's call it a society, that has value addition and gains in terms of efficiency and solidarity that you couldn't otherwise get as a selfish individual. Fast forward several decades, look at a company like Google, which has extraordinary amount of research and data. They look at which groups work the best. And they see that diverse groups work best, provided that there is goodwill. That if you have diversity but no goodwill, it's very easy for a small group to sabotage the work of the team. But if you get goodwill and diversity, you get the benefit, all the wealth of information that comes with diversity, but you can also not pay the negative costs of too much diversity, something that we can file under institutional culture. So, what does all this mean? I think all this means that, as Lena hinted, we have to take horizontal relationships as seriously as we take vertical ones. Politics is supposed to be about who governs who has power, but maybe it is also about how we deal with our peers. That societies that we value, we respect as healthy democracies, may have gotten the horizontal relationships right as much as they've gotten the vertical relationships right. Let me move on to the next subject, which is how do we generate that goodwill that Kant referred to, that Öström said, that Axelrod said was necessary to the tournament strategy. You may have heard about the tragedy of the commons. We are told that if something is owned by everyone, it's not owned by anyone, that its quality goes down, that we overgraze grazing lands with our animals. This is the thesis advocated by people who think everything should be under private property. But there was an interesting economist, Elinor Ostrom, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And he said, you know what, I look around and see in different societies ways of governing the commons. Which reminds me, I should have introduced a definition in the beginning. When I say civics, I don't mean what you find in textbooks, at least in Turkey or in the United States. When you open up a civics textbook in United States, you will see branches of government, constitution, separation of powers. That's not what I mean. With civics, I mean our shared know-how to co-manage our commons, okay? I hope this translates well in Russian. It will translate terribly in Turkish because these are clunky words. But commons, this, and its co-management, everything we have done through the centuries to distill that know-how is what I'm referring to as civics. So Elinor Ostrom looked at Swiss farmers, Japanese villagers, and Turkish fishermen. She looked at the fishermen in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean, and then in Istanbul. And she saw that some of them could cooperate, not overfish, and some of them couldn't. And there was no state power involved. This was all self-government. She discovered that if they were going to the same cafes, if they're getting married in the same locales, if they were sharing a destiny together, if they needed to look into each other's eyes, it was far easier to enforce tacit contracts without the sword. Robert Putnam, an important American sociologist, also agrees and says that the reason why the United States could run a market economy without too much state is that it had deep cultural capital. That without that cultural capital, that level of civil society would have been impossible. And one of his last books is called Bowling Alone, and he chronicles the deterioration of that cultural capital, social capital, and cultural capital. David Brooks, a conservative writing for New York Times, says, yes, we compete, but we compete towards a backdrop of a collegial fabric, which we have woven together through associations, through churches, and through things like bowling leagues, that we would ignore that fabric at our own risk. All this reminds me that in the famous slogans of the French Revolution, yes, there was equality, yes, there was liberty, but there was also fraternity. So taking civics, for me, is also taking fraternity seriously and taking our art of collaboration seriously. Again, one other thing that we would do if we take civics seriously, I'll check my time, I think I still have some more time, is to recognize that civics is a global know-how, that different societies have had different color, different taste, different body language in this art of co-managing commons. For example, Gandhi argued that we don't have rights if we don't have responsibilities. that we can't claim rights to anything unless we have taken the responsibilities for the same thing. Now, this rings rather illiberal, right? Because all liberal texts start with our rights, not with our responsibilities. Gandhi seems to be saying, no, responsibilities come first. I think we need to listen to him. I think we need to be thoughtful about this iterative relationships between responsibility and rights. Now, clearly we have some rights before we have responsibilities because we are born with rights, and we can't have that many responsibilities when we are a baby. But maybe it's a paid forward, paid backwards issue. Maybe someone lends us certain rights, which we need to live up to in terms of responsibilities, and paid forward. There is apparently a Greek proverb that says, we'll be a good society when old men plant trees under whose shadow they know they're not going to sleep under. Okay? Can we think of civilization as a methodology of paying it forward and paying it backwards? Tu Weiming, an important Chinese scholar, reads Confucius and says, when a dilemma was presented, you had to choose between food, security, and trust. And Confucius was asked, which one should we give up first? He said, give up on security. Okay. Food and trust is left. Which one should we give up if we are forced to give up? He said, give up on food, but never on trust. Because if you are going to reweave a fabric that will get you food and security, trust is indispensable. Eduardo Galeano, a thinker, writer from Uruguay who recently died, writing about Maya in Central America, said when it was time for them to choose a leader, they chose a leader who did not talk the best, but who listened the best. Now, what an interesting idea. Listening well, listening generously, is a precondition to becoming a leader. Now, why do you think that is? Could it be that we learn a great deal when we listen well? Not with the intention to argue back, but with the intent to understand. Could a leader who listens well, could it be that he or she soothes the followers? Do we feel well when we feel we have been heard? Something we can learn in terms of civics from the Mayans. We talked about the Muslims greeting by saying, I will do no harm, needs to be reciprocated right away, so both sides say they are not going to do harm. But there is one more onus. You need to go back and ask after a while, have I kept my word? So this is why when a Muslim passes away during the funeral, everyone has to verify that they haven't been harmed by that person. Or if you are going on a long journey, if there will be a break in this relationship, I need to come to each of you and say, have I kept up my word to be a good person and not harm you? Faithful Muslims believe that they can't go to heaven unless each of their interlocutors have vouched for them. So they feel that their transgressions against God can be forgiven, but the transgressions against their peers can only be forgiven by that peer and no one else. Or take a gentleman like Desmond Tutu, who talked about Ubuntu, a very interesting philosophy/religion, where I don't say I am because I think, but I say I am because you are. That it is in the relationship that I find myself. That a self-sufficient person is an impoverished person. That we achieve humanity together. Now, our search for managing our commons hasn't always gone well. We've also made mistakes. We have done things that I'm sure vast majority of humanity now thinks was a mistake. Ethnic cleansing is a way of co-managing your commons. If you don't want to co-manage it with certain type of people, you eliminate them from an equation. Eugenics was a way of co-managing commons. You don't want a certain type of people to be around the table, you eliminate them. At certain times, we believed in too much solidarity. From each according to its ability, to each according to his needs, was a beautiful formula, and I think we can agree that it didn't work. If we take civics seriously as our joint journey to fine-tune our know-how of co-managing commons, I think we need to learn, we have to be as willing to learn from our mistakes as we are from our successes. Another point that I want to flag for you, curiosity versus indignation. Now, liberalism tells us to be indignant. I would argue civics would encourage us to be curious. Take a medium like New York Times and the election of Donald Trump as president. I read New York Times almost every day, and in the last 2 years, I haven't read anything that will help me understand why a disagreeable figure like Donald Trump was elected. New York Times is advising me to be indignant. And that indignation is coming at the cost of my curiosity. I would argue that we have overgrown indignation muscles, and we have curiosity muscles that have atrophied. Curiosity is a cognitive muscle. And like all muscles, if you don't work it, it atrophies. Civics, I would say, argues that what we owe each other, first and foremost, is our heed and our attention and our curiosity. That helps me come to my last point. You have this ultimatum game and then the dictator's game played by 2 people. There's a version of this game which is played by 5 people. Again, 100 euros are given. There's a pot in the middle. Everyone can put whatever money they want into that pot. When everyone is done contributing, the pot is doubled and distributed evenly back to the 5 people. Okay? Now, the results of ultimatum game and dictator's game does not change from one country to another. This game does change. If there is high trust, what would you do? Put all the money in. It will be doubled in any event, so you get rich, everyone gets rich within a minute. Yet this changes from society to society. On average, humanity puts in only 1/3 of the money, wants to check what everyone else is doing, because if you're over generous, you actually lose. Your money will be multiplied, you will get back equal share, but because you have given too much, you will be actually worse off than the people who didn't give anything, right? So this is a setup that punishes over generosity or naive generosity. So when this is played in rounds, by round 5, nobody puts anything. Because I put in something, you didn't put in anything, then I get discouraged and don't put back anything. 2 things change and increase the contribution. One is if there is a penalty for under-contributing. If I can punish you for under-contributing, you can start paying higher contributions. Or if we are allowed to talk. Now, interesting. If before we make our contributions, we are allowed to say, come on guys, let's not be stupid, let's in the first round at least put in 50 euros and then next round 60 euros. So conversation works. Humanity is capable of establishing covenants not only through swords, but also through conversation. I would argue that conversation is the most magical of human activities. The etymology is interesting. Conversation means changing together. It requires good faith. It also requires rendering borders and hierarchies less rigid. It is through conversations that we discover each other. You may have seen the video made by Amnesty International in Poland, where Syrian refugees and their Polish and German hosts seem to stare into each other's eyes for a few minutes. You may have recalled the speech of John Kennedy in 1963, where he says, no one paid a higher price to beat Hitler than Russians. This was 9 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was advised not to give the speech because this would be conceding too much to an enemy. He made that speech, and we got the first nuclear arms treaty after that speech. We are capable of recognizing each other and hearing each other generously. So I would argue that if we take civics seriously, we also need to take encounters and conversations seriously for what they are, which are indispensable building blocks of civility and civilization. I have a point about public goods as well, but why don't I shut up for this to be a good conversation and invite your comments and questions and disagreements and feedback. So thank you for listening to me.